The bay mare came out of the red dust like something chased by judgment. Thomas Greyhorse saw her from the trough, one hand still wrapped around the rusted pump handle, the other slick with mud from where the pipe had split again beneath the fitting. At first he thought it was one of Hosteen Yazzy's riders coming from the trading post, maybe bringing word that a shipment had arrived, or a bill had been miscounted. Then the mare came closer, and he saw the rider's back held too straight, the dark braid pinned beneath a black hat, the blue skirt gathered carefully over one knee. A woman riding alone at noon through canyon heat was either foolish, desperate, or braver than most men had sense enough to be. Thomas let go of the pump handle. The wind had died and the whole ranch seemed to be holding its breath. The sheep in the far pen stood with their heads down in the shade of the cottonwood. His old buckskin horse, Peso, flicked one ear and watched the mare approach with the tired suspicion of an animal that had seen enough trouble in its life to recognize it from a distance. The woman did not call out. She rode through the gate Thomas had left half open and stopped 10 yards from the porch. Dust settled around the mare's legs. For a moment, neither rider nor rancher said anything. Then she lifted her face. Atsa Yazzie. Thomas knew her the way everyone around Red Mesa Crossing knew her. Daughter of Hosteen Yazzie, who ran the trading post by the dry wash. Niece of Nalini Yazzie, the widow who wove blankets so fine men lowered their voices when they touched them. Atsa was known for her beauty, but Thomas had never trusted that as the thing that mattered most about her. Beauty was what careless people noticed first. What he had noticed the few times he had gone into the trading post was how still she could become when men were lying. She sat that way now. Still, but not calm. Mr. Greyhorse, she said. Miss Yazzie. Her eyes moved once over the yard, the broken pump, the mud on his sleeves, the house behind him, the fence line beyond it. She was not looking for comfort. She was measuring what kind of place she had come to and whether she had been right to come. I need to speak with you, she said, privately. Thomas wiped his hands on a rag that was already past saving. There's water on the porch. Chairs sound enough if you don't lean too far back. She dismounted with the practiced ease of someone who had been riding before she had been tall enough to bridle her own horse. She tied the mare to the post and followed him to the porch. Thomas filled 2 tin cups from the barrel inside the shade, handed one to her, and sat on the low step instead of the second chair. Atsa held the cup but did not drink. For a while there was only the faint creak of the windmill and the heat ticking in the boards of the house. Beyond the yard, Canyon de Chelly rose in long red walls, old and silent and indifferent to the troubles of people who lived beneath them. I will be direct, she said at last, because I believe you prefer truth over decoration. Generally, Thomas said. She looked at him, then straight enough that a weaker man might have mistaken it for challenge. I want you to marry me. The words stood between them in the heat. Thomas did not move. A raven called from somewhere along the ridge, harsh and lonely. The sheep shifted in their pen. That is direct, he said. I know. You had better tell me why. Atsa lowered the cup to the porch rail. Her fingers were steady around it, but steady in the way a rope is steady when it is pulled tight. My father has paid Sheriff Elias Crow for 4 years, she said. Every month. Crow calls it a protection fee. He says the trading post operates in peace because he allows it to operate in peace. Thomas's face did not change. He had suspected as much. Not the amounts, not the dates, but the shape of it. Crow had come to Red Mesa Crossing 3 years earlier with polished boots, pale eyes, and the kind of smile that seemed to measure what a man could lose. Since then, boundary lines had shifted, licenses had vanished, and men who spoke too sharply found trouble waiting for them in official language. My father pays, Atsa continued, because the post is everything he built after my mother died. Because he thinks if he keeps his head down, Crow will take the money and leave the rest of us alone. She stopped. Thomas waited. The silence lengthened until it became clear the hard part had not yet been spoken. 2 months ago, she said, Crow came to the trading post when my father was away buying flour and lamp oil from Fort Defiance. My aunt was in the back room with the wool. I was at the counter. Her jaw tightened only a little. He said a woman like me should not spend her life counting beans and coffee tins for other people. He said I could be comfortable. He said my father's troubles could disappear if I learned to be reasonable. The word reasonable came out with no anger in it, which made it worse. Thomas looked down at his hands. Mud had dried in the creases of his knuckles. He felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with fear. He touched you, he asked. No. She answered quickly, then corrected herself with more care. Not that day, not yet, not yet. The two words seemed to change the temperature under the porch roof. My father does not know, she said. If I tell him, he will go to Crow. He is 63 years old, proud and tired in ways he will not admit. Crow would jail him or ruin him or put a bullet in him and call it resistance. You cannot leave. My father is my family. My aunt is my family. The trading post feeds more than us. I cannot run from a house while people I love are still inside it. Thomas nodded once. Not approval. Understanding. So you want a husband? I need a husband. She looked at him without flinching. Not any husband. A man Crow would have to think about before he moved. A man with land. A man with no debt. A man whose word carries weight with both ranchers and Diné families. A man who is not loud and not careless and not owned by anyone. Thomas gave a dry breath that was not quite a laugh. That narrows the county some. It led me here. He looked out towards the south pasture, where the grass had gone pale under the long dry season. Why me specifically, he asked. There are other men with more land. More friends. More money. Yes, Atsa said. And most of them talk too much. That nearly made him smile. Nearly. She continued before he could answer. You have come to my father's post for years. You never spoke down to him. You never spoke to me like I was standing there for decoration. Last winter, when Len Pritchard was drunk and called my aunt a blanket witch, you told him to shut his mouth. You said it once, and he did. He was drunk. He was cruel. There is a difference. Thomas said nothing, and she added quieter now. I think you are lonely enough to understand what it means to want something real instead of something easy. That landed closer than he wanted it to. For 11 years, Thomas had lived on that ranch by himself. 11 years of mending fence, counting animals, paying bills, sleeping in a house that made the same sounds every night, because no other person was there to change them. People in Red Mesa Crossing called him honest, dependable, quiet. They said it with respect, but sometimes respect was just a clean cloth laid over pity. He had told himself the work was enough. Most days he almost believed it. Atsa looked away, first not from weakness, but because she had said what she came to say, and would not decorate it with pleading. I am not asking for love, Mr. Greyhorse, she said. I am asking for a name strong enough to stand between my family and a man who thinks fear is law. The words settled into the boards between them. Thomas rose slowly and walked to the porch rail. The canyon walls burned red in the distance. The trading post lay 5 miles east beyond the wash, and the low rise where juniper grew crooked out of stone. He pictured Hostine Yazzie behind his counter, precise hands measuring sugar back straight despite the years. He pictured Crow standing there with his badge bright and his smile patient. Men like Crow did not stop because a person suffered. They stopped when the cost became uncertain. You want an answer now? Thomas asked. I would rather have a true answer tomorrow than a careless one today. He turned back to her. Come in the morning. She picked up her hat, and placed it on her head. For the first time, the control in her face seemed to loosen just enough for him to see the fear beneath it. Not much. Only enough to prove it was there. Thank you for listening, she said. You did the hard part. She almost smiled. Then she mounted and rode away through the red dust back toward the road that led to Red Mesa Crossing. Thomas watched until the mare became a small, moving shape beyond the cottonwoods, then nothing at all. That night, he did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with a lamp burning low and a cup of coffee growing cold near his elbow. The house was quiet around him. Too quiet. He took out the notebook from beneath the loose board under his bed and laid it open in front of him. 4 months of dates, names, small thefts, changed boundaries, threats dressed as inspections, men who lowered their voices when Crow's name was spoken. Thomas read through every page, not because he needed reminding, but because decisions should be made with all the weight visible. By dawn, the answer had already formed in him. Atsa returned when the first light touched the canyon rim. Thomas was waiting on the porch. Yes, he said before she dismounted. She stopped with one hand on the saddle horn. Just like that, I thought about it all night. She stepped down slowly and came toward him. You understand what Crow will do. He will come after me. Yes. He will try paper first, then property, then reputation, maybe jail if he can shape it right. Atsa studied him. You have thought about men like him. Thomas reached inside his coat and pulled out the small brown notebook. For a while now, he said. Her eyes moved to the book. What is that? The reason I am not walking into this empty-handed. He held it out. Atsa took it carefully, as if paper could be heavier than iron. Thomas looked toward the road, toward the town, toward the sheriff, who did not yet know he had made the mistake of pushing the wrong woman toward the wrong, lonely man. If we do this, he said, we do it honestly, and we do it prepared. The news reached Red Mesa Crossing before Atsa Yazi did. That was the way of small places. A horse could make better time than a wagon, but talk traveled faster than either slipping through open doors, over counters between women buying flour, and men pretending not to listen while they leaned near the stove. By the time Atsa rode past the wash and turned the bay mare toward her father's trading post, 3 people had already heard that she had gone alone to Thomas Greyhorse's ranch. By sundown, 5 more would be certain they knew why. Inside the trading post, Hostine Yazi was measuring coffee beans into a paper sack when she came through the side door. He looked up once, and the careful motion of his hands slowed. You rode far, he said. Far enough. He tied the sack with string and set it on the counter. He was 63 years old, compact, straight-backed with silver, beginning in his black hair, and a face made stern by years of holding too much inside. Since Atsa's mother had died, he had kept the post the way some men kept prayer, precise, orderly, and necessary. Nothing out of place, nothing wasted, nothing allowed to fall apart where people could see. You went to Greyhorse, he said. Atsa removed her gloves finger by finger. Yes. Hostine watched her hands. He had always watched her hands when he was worried, as if truth might appear there before it reached her mouth. He came to me first, she said. The lie had been agreed upon before she left Thomas's porch. It settled badly in her throat, but not as badly as the truth would have settled in her father's heart. Hostine said nothing. He asked if I would consider marriage, she continued. I told him I would. Her father stood very still behind the counter. A sack of coffee rested near his left hand. A ledger lay open beneath the lamp. Outside, a mule brayed near the hitching rail, and someone laughed on the porch of the freight office across the road. Thomas Greyhorse Hosteen said at last, "Yes. He is a quiet man." Yes. Too quiet, some would say. Some people talk because they have nothing worth keeping. Hosteen's eyes lifted to hers. There was something almost like approval in them, though it passed quickly. You know him, I know his reputation. I know how he conducts himself. I know he pays what he owes, and does not use a woman's presence as invitation to make himself larger. Her father looked away first. That was how she knew the answer had reached him. In the back room, wool moved softly through Nalini Yazi's fingers. Atsa's aunt sat near the small window, carding fleece into clean rolls for spinning. She did not look up, but Atsa felt her listening. Nalini had been widowed 8 years and had learned in that long silence how much could be heard from the space between words. "Do you want this?" Hosteen asked. That was the question he had been walking around since she entered. Atsa thought of Thomas sitting on the porch step, with mud drying on his sleeves, listening without pity. She thought of the notebook in his hand, the brown cover worn soft at the edges, the quiet fact that he had been building something before she knew to ask. "I am choosing," she said. "That is not the same as settling." Hosteen looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached for the coffee sack and placed it on the shelf behind him, with unnecessary care. Your mother would have wanted to speak with him. Mama would have known in 10 minutes whether he was honest. She was hard on men. She was usually right. That almost drew a smile from him. Almost. Instead, he rubbed one hand over his mouth and looked toward the back room where Nalini's wool cards had gone still. When Sunatsa said, quietly, his face tightened. "A woman should not have to marry quietly." "No," she said, "but some things grow safer when they begin without a crowd." He heard something under that. Not all of it. Enough to worry him. "Atsa." She held his gaze and made herself steady. "He is a good man, Papa." Hosteen did not answer immediately. He had never been a man who trusted good news the first time it was offered. Life had taught him to count change twice and joy 3 times. At last he nodded once. "Then you tell Thomas Greyhorse," he said, voice low, "that your father expects him to remember whose daughter you are." "I will tell him, and that I will be watching. I will tell him that too." Nalini spoke from the back room without turning. "If he is worth marrying, he already knows." Hosteen frowned toward the doorway. "You heard everything I heard enough. The rest I guessed." Later, when the lamps were lit, and Hosteen had gone to check the storeroom inventory for the 3rd time that evening, Nalini found Atsa behind the post, near the stacked crates of flour. The old woman carried a basket of wool against one hip. Her hair was streaked gray and tied low, and her face had the soft severity of desert stone worn by wind but not weakened by it. "What did Crow do?" she asked. Atsa's hands stilled on the crate lid. For a moment, she was again behind the counter, Crow's pale eyes moving over her like a claim, his voice smooth, his smile patient. Reasonable, he had said, as if the word itself were a hand placed on the back of her neck. "He spoke," she said. Nalini waited. He made it clear what he wanted. The older woman's eyes darkened, but she did not gasp, did not reach for Atsa, did not turn the moment into something that needed managing. That was why Atsa could remain standing. "Did he touch you?" "No." Yet Atsa closed her eyes once. "No." Nalini set the basket down. Fear carried in secret grows teeth. "I know, no." You are learning. Nalini stepped closer. A woman asking for help is not surrendering. Sometimes it is the first brave thing anyone has done. Atsa looked toward the front of the store, where her father's shadow moved behind the shelves. He would go to Crow. Yes. And Crow would destroy him. Yes. Neither of them softened the truth. Nalini reached out and adjusted the edge of Atsa's sleeve, a small motherly gesture she rarely allowed herself. Then marry the quiet man if he is steady. But do not mistake quiet for weak, and do not let him mistake your asking for helplessness. I do not think he will. Good. Nalini picked up the basket again. A promise made for survival is still a promise if both people understand the weight of it before they speak the words. The sentence stayed with Atsa long after her aunt left the room. 3 days later, Thomas began preparing his house. He did it the way he did all things, without announcement and without wasted motion. He cleared the spare room first. It had been storage for 11 years, old tack-broken chair legs, a trunk of winter blankets, a box of horseshoes, 2 cracked lamps, and things he had kept not because he needed them, but because throwing them out required deciding they belonged to no future use. By noon, the room had a bed frame, a clean quilt, a small table, and a window facing west, where afternoon light touched the floorboards. He fixed the porch step that had been soft since spring. He repaired the sheep pen gate. He swept the kitchen twice, then stood in the doorway and saw with some discomfort that sweeping did not make a house less lonely. It only made the loneliness cleaner. Atsa came the following afternoon. She brought no trunk, only a small account book, a pencil, and the look of a person who had no intention of wasting daylight. Thomas showed her the room. She stood in the doorway, considered it, and nodded. It will do, I can put up a shelf. That would help, I will. They went to the kitchen table and spoke like 2 people negotiating a bridge before crossing it. Separate rooms. Shared household labor. No false tenderness for the comfort of anyone watching. Honesty in public and private. Her help with accounts. His protection in law and name. No promises beyond what could be kept. When Thomas brought out his ranch ledger, she studied it for 20 minutes in silence. You have been overcharged at McCall's supply store, she said. I know, not once. 5 times. I knew about 2. She turned the ledger toward him and tapped the page. Here, here, and here. Thomas leaned closer, reading her marks. McCall's arithmetic is poor. His arithmetic improves when the mistake favors him. Thomas looked at her then. This time he did smile, though only a little. You may handle McCall. I intended to. Their wedding took place the following week in the small territorial office that stood beside the freight yard, a square room with dust on the windowsills, and a clerk who had married enough people to know which ones wanted ceremony and which ones wanted the law handled cleanly. Thomas wore his best shirt and the silver concho belt that had belonged to his mother's brother. Atsa wore a dark blue dress and the woven sash Nalini had finished 2 nights before, red and black and white in a pattern old enough that no one in the room needed it explained. Hosteen stood straight-backed, his mouth pressed into a line. Nalini stood beside him, hands folded, eyes sharp. 2 witnesses signed. The clerk spoke the words. Thomas looked at Atsa when his turn came. I do, he said. Atsa answered the same. No music. No flowers. No kiss demanded by a room full of people pretending they understood. Only signatures. Only law. Only a promise both of them knew was heavier than paper. That evening, Atsa rode to Thomas's ranch in his wagon, 2 trunks in the back, and her mare tied behind. The house was quiet when they entered, but not empty in the same way. Thomas carried one trunk to her room. She carried the other herself. Neither of them argued about it. The first night passed with a strangeness neither spoke of. Thomas lay awake longer than usual, listening to the sounds of the house changed by another person inside it. A floorboard, a drawer, the faint movement of cloth. Small things, ordinary things. But to him they sounded like a language he had forgotten he once hoped to learn. In the morning, Atsa was up before him. Coffee sat on the stove. His ledger lay open on the table. She had already found another error. "You rise early," he said. "So do you. I heard you moving. I heard you pretending not to." He paused, then poured coffee. "Fair enough." She looked down at the ledger. "McCall owes you $8. Does he?" "He will by noon." It was the most ordinary morning Thomas had known in years, and because of that, it unsettled him more than danger might have. The warning came before the week was out. Thomas found it just after sunrise, lying at the base of the porch steps, a dead raven. Its wings had been spread flat, arranged with care. Not dropped, placed. Atsa came to the doorway behind him and stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind crossed the yard and stirred dust against the bird's black feathers. "Crow," she said. "Yes." Her face hardened. Not fear first. Anger. Thomas wrapped the bird in an old cloth and carried it away from the house. When he returned, Atsa was still standing on the porch, arms crossed against the morning chill. "He wants us to know he can come close," she said. "He wants us to change what we do. And if we do not," Thomas looked past the yard toward the south grazing gate, where the land fell away toward the dry wash. "Then he will have to do something louder." Atsa followed his gaze. In the soft dirt near the gate, fresh horse tracks cut across the ground where none had been the evening before. The latch hung open, lifted clean by a human hand. Thomas took his hat from the porch rail and stepped down into the yard. By the time the sun cleared the canyon wall, he was already walking toward the south pasture, counting what was missing. Thomas found the first print beside the lifted latch, pressed clean into the soft red dirt, where the night's thin dew had held the ground just damp enough to remember. He crouched there a long moment without touching anything. One horse had come in close to the gate. Two more had waited beyond the wash where the grass broke thin over stone and tracks would be harder to read. Whoever had done it knew enough not to crowd the entrance, knew enough not to break the latch, knew enough to make theft look at first glance like carelessness. The sheep had not wandered. That was the first truth. The second was worse. The animals had been moved quietly by men who had done this before. Thomas stood and looked out across the south grazing ground. Morning had come hard and white over the canyon rim, and the land lay exposed beneath it. Every mesquite shadow sharp, every dry tuft of grass pale as bone. The remaining sheep clustered near the far fence, unsettled heads lifted toward the gate, as if even they understood a piece of the flock had been taken out of the world. Atsa came up behind him without speaking. He had heard her steps in the dirt light, and measured not hesitant. "How many?" she asked. 31 sheep, Thomas said, and 5 cattle from the lower wash. Her face did not change quickly. She took the number and held it, let it settle where useful things settled in her mind. Crow. His men likely, or men who want him pleased. Thomas walked the gate line, studying the ground. Atsa followed at a distance, careful not to step over the sign. He appreciated that without saying so. Most people, even decent people, came near trouble and trampled the truth out of it before they knew what they had done. The tracks angled southeast first, then cut toward a low strip of stone where no easy sign would hold. Beyond that, the land bent toward a grazing parcel claimed by Silas Varn, a narrow-shouldered man who had become suddenly prosperous 2 years after Elias Crow put on the badge. Thomas knew the direction. He knew the shape of the thing. He took off his hat and wiped one hand over his forehead. Atsa watched him. "You are not surprised?" "No. That makes it worse. It usually does." He looked toward the road that led to Red Mesa Crossing. The sheriff's office sat 5 miles away behind a false front and a flagpole, and inside it, Elias Crow would be waiting in his polished boots, acting like a man troubled by the burdens of law. "I am going to town," Thomas said. Atsa's eyes narrowed slightly. "To Crow. To report a theft. You know he is behind it." "Yes. And you are going to hand him the first page of the story he wants to write." Thomas looked back at the open gate. "No. I am going to make him put his hand on the paper." She understood then. He saw it come into her face, the shift from anger to calculation. "A record," she said. "A date. A complaint. My words written before his. He will twist it. He will try." Atsa looked past him toward the disturbed sheep. A man who owns the law does not need to draw his gun first. He only needs people to believe the paper before they believe their own eyes. Thomas turned to her. She said it quietly, almost to herself, but the words carried the weight of something she had learned by watching her father pay money he did not owe to a man who called theft protection. "That is why I need my paper before he writes his," Thomas said. He saddled Peso without hurry. Atsa stood near the porch with her rifle in one hand and a shawl around her shoulders, the dark blue of it moving slightly in the morning wind. "You should go to your father's post until I come back," he said. "No." He tightened the cinch. "Someone may come while I am gone. That is why I am staying." He looked at her then. She met his gaze plainly. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. My aunt taught me not to waste the first shot. Between them, I learned enough." Thomas held her eyes a moment longer, then nodded. There were arguments a man made because they were wise, and arguments a man made because he wanted the world to be safer than it was. He knew the difference well enough not to mistake one for the other. "Do not open the door to anyone." "I was not planning to serve coffee." This time he almost smiled. The ride into Red Mesa Crossing felt longer than 5 miles. Thomas passed Juniper Dry Wash and Low Red Stone warmed by the sun. Twice he saw riders in the distance who turned away before the road brought them close. By the time the settlement appeared ahead, the rumor of his missing livestock had somehow outrun him. People looked from doorways. A boy near the freight yard stopped rolling a barrel and stared. Thomas tied Peso outside the sheriff's office and went in. Elias Crow sat behind his desk with his coat open and his badge bright enough to catch the window light. He was broad through the shoulders, clean-shaven, pale-eyed, and comfortable in the way of men who had taught a room to make space for them before they entered it. "Greyhorse," he said, "you are a long way from your trough this morning. I need to report stolen livestock." Crow leaned back, concern arranging itself neatly on his face. "That's so. 31 sheep and 5 cattle taken from my south grazing ground sometime in the night." Gate opened by hand. Tracks showed 3 riders. They moved southeast, then cut toward the Varn parcel. Crow reached for a form. He dipped his pen and began writing. Thomas watched the hand, not the face. 31 sheep, Crow repeated. 5 cattle. You are sure they did not break through? The latch was lifted. Wind catches things sometimes. Not a drop latch. Crow's pen paused a fraction too long. Then it moved again. And you say toward Varn's land. I said the tracks cut in that direction. Varn is a respectable man. I did not say he was not. Crow looked up. His eyes rested on Thomas with the careful patience of a man deciding whether to press hard now or later. "How is Mrs. Greyhorse settling in?" he asked. Thomas felt the room narrow around the question. "Well enough. Fine woman, Atsayazi. Her family has been part of this place a long time. I would hate to see trouble come near them." "So would I." The silence after that was thin and sharp. Crow smiled with no warmth in it. "I will look into your sheep. I would appreciate a copy of the report. That is not usually necessary. It is to me." Crow studied him. Then he tore the lower sheet from beneath the form, signed it, and slid it across the desk. Thomas folded it once and put it inside his coat. Outside, the sun had climbed higher. Red Mesa Crossing moved around him in its ordinary way, but the ordinariness felt staged. A woman crossed the street with flour under one arm and did not look at him until she thought he had turned away. Two men near the blacksmith fell silent when he passed. When Thomas reached home, Atsa sat on the porch with the rifle across her knees, and one of his account ledgers open beside her. "Still alive," she said. "So far." How did he take it, like a man who already knew the answer to every question he did not ask? She closed the ledger. "He mentioned me." "Yes." A small, hard line appeared near her mouth, then vanished. "Of course he did." Thomas handed her the copy of the report. She read it twice. "He wrote alleged theft," she said. "I saw. He is leaving room to turn it." "Yes. Then we need more than your notebook." "We do." They got it sooner than either expected. Near sundown, Ben Tallman rode up from the west with his hat in his hands and shame sitting plain on his face. He was a big older man with wind-burned skin and eyes that had spent too many years looking at horizons that did not answer back. "I heard about your stock," he said. Thomas stood by the gate. "Most people have." Ben looked toward the house where Atsa stood in the doorway. "Crow did something like that to me. Not sheep. Land." Thomas waited. 2 years back, county records changed my north grazing boundary. Gave 20 acres of my grass to Varn. I fought it for a week, then stopped. Why, Ben looked at the dirt. Because Crow told me my barn looked dry. Atsa came down from the porch. "Do you have proof?" Ben swallowed. "My wife does." The next morning, Ruth Tallman arrived with documents wrapped in oilcloth, and anger wrapped tighter than that. She was small, gray-eyed, and plain-spoken, the kind of woman who looked at a man's excuse and saw the fear underneath it. "I kept copies," she said, laying the papers on Thomas's table. Ben called it worrying. I called it not trusting men who change maps after dark. Atsa looked at her for a long moment, then carefully unfolded the first document. The two women bent over the papers together, and Thomas saw something pass between them that did not require introduction. Recognition, maybe, or the knowledge that women often survived by noticing what men were too proud to admit had hurt them. By the end of the week, more names had come. Samuel Begay from the mill, whose grinding stone had been cracked after he stopped paying Crow. Jonas Redfeather, whose water hearing had been moved without notice. Peter Two Rivers, who had paid Crow's men for 3 years and kept rough marks of every dollar on the back of feed receipts. Thomas listened. Atsa organized. Ruth corrected dates. Ben sat near the stove looking like a man who had finally put down a load and was ashamed of how long he had carried it. The notebook grew heavier. Then 11 nights after the livestock vanished, Thomas woke to the smell of smoke. He was out of bed before thought caught up to him. Atsa came from her room already dressed, rifle in hand. They ran toward the north fence where orange light licked against the dark and sparks lifted into the wind. They fought the fire with buckets, dirt, and breath until dawn showed them what remained. 40 feet of fence gone black. 2 good posts burned to the ground. Ash drifting over the dirt like dirty snow. Atsa stood beside him, smoke caught in her hair, face streaked with soot. "He is getting louder," she said. Thomas looked at the ruined fence, then toward the road. "No," he said. "He is getting ready." 2 days later, Deputy Martin Cole rode in with an official paper folded inside his coat. Thomas opened it at the gate and read the words once, then again. He was under investigation for livestock theft. Deputy Martin Cole held the notice like it might burn him if he gripped it too tight. Thomas saw that before he read the paper. The deputy sat his gray horse just outside the gate. Hat pulled low against the morning glare. One boot turned slightly inward in the stirrup. He was young enough to still look uncomfortable wearing another man's orders, but old enough to understand they were orders all the same. Behind him, the road to Red Mesa Crossing lay pale and empty, a strip of dust between juniper and stone. Thomas unfolded the paper. The words had been chosen carefully. Official notice. Active inquiry. Suspected livestock theft. Property subject to inspection. Records subject to review. Cooperation expected. He read it once, then again. The badge made his lie official, but it did not make it true. Atsa stood on the porch behind him, one hand resting on the post, her face unreadable in the early light. She did not come closer. She knew better than to crowd a piece of paper that might later matter. Thomas looked up from the notice. "Sheriff Crow is accusing me." Cole shifted in the saddle. "It only says you're part of an investigation into animals stolen from my own land. The sheriff is looking at all directions." "Is he?" Cole's eyes flicked toward the porch, then away. "I only brought the notice." Thomas folded the paper carefully and put it inside his coat. "How long have you worked for Crow?" Cole frowned, confused by the turn. "Going on 2 years. You from around here, north of Fort Defiance. Family there, my mother. Younger sister. Good people." The deputy's jaw worked once. "Yes," Thomas nodded. "Then you know what it means to bring a paper like this to a man whose animals were taken and whose fence was burned." Cole did not answer. "You also know," Thomas said, voice quiet, "that delivering paper can still help bury the truth." The deputy looked at him down, and for a breath there was something naked and frightened in his face. Not guilt, exactly. Guilt was what came after a man stopped explaining himself. This was the fear before that. "I just do my work," Cole said. "So does a shovel." Cole's mouth tightened. He touched his reins. "Sheriff expects cooperation. He'll have all the cooperation the law requires." Cole turned his horse and rode away without looking back. Thomas watched until the dust settled behind him. Atsa stepped down from the porch. "He knows." "Yes. Will that matter?" "Not yet." She looked toward the road. "Crow is ready, almost. Then we cannot wait." Thomas turned toward the house. "I will ride today. Ben and Ruth first, then Samuel, Jonas, and Peter. They need to know the shape of it. And my father's records. I was going to ask for them tomorrow." Atsa looked at him. He stopped. "Today," he said. "Yes." There was no argument in her voice. That made it harder to resist than if there had been. He rode a long circle under a sky too blue for the kind of day it was. At Ben Tallman's place, Ruth came to the door before Ben reached the yard. She had already heard, of course. By then, half the country had heard half the truth and guessed the rest badly. She listened while Thomas explained the notice and what it meant. Ben stood beside her with his hat in his hands. He's going to say you moved your own stock, Ben said. He will say I reported it early to cover myself. Ruth gave a short, humorless breath. Clever. Crow usually is, Thomas said. Ruth looked at her husband. We should have spoken 2 years ago. Ben's face tightened. I know, no, she said. You knew then. Now you're saying it. The words landed hard, but not cruelly. Thomas saw Ben take them because they were true. I'll stand, Ben said. If it comes. It is coming, Thomas said. Ruth went inside and returned with the oilcloth packet. Then these come too. Originals stay with me. Copies go with you. If I wake tomorrow and my house is burned, I want the truth already somewhere else. Thomas took the packet. You thought that through. I've been married to a frightened man for 2 years, Ruth said, not looking at Ben. I had time. Ben lowered his head, but when he raised it again, there was less shame in his face and more decision. Samuel Begay was at his mill arms, dusted white eyes, tired before Thomas said a word. When Thomas told him Crow had begun the formal move, Samuel leaned both hands on the work table and looked at the cracked stone Crow's men had left him months ago. I am not brave, Samuel said. Most people aren't. I have children. I know. Samuel looked up. That is why I paid. That is why I stayed quiet. I know that too. The miller closed his eyes briefly. Fear gets expensive after a while. Yes. Samuel reached beneath the table and pulled out a folded statement wrapped in cloth. My wife wrote it clean. My hand shakes when I write angry. Thomas took it. Will you speak if needed? Samuel looked toward the door, where the afternoon light fell over sacks of grain. If I do not, my children will learn the same silence I learned. I would rather they learn something else. Jonas Redfeather met Thomas near a dry irrigation ditch that should have carried enough water to keep his bean rows alive. He held the county notice that had moved his hearing without warning. The paper was creased from being read too often. Water can be stolen without touching it, Jonas said. All a man needs is a clerk, a date, and someone willing to say, you missed your chance. Peter Two Rivers said little. He listened from the doorway of his low house while his youngest boy watched from behind his leg. Then he went inside and returned with feed receipts marked on the back in pencil. Every dollar, Peter said. His voice was flat, but his hand trembled. By the time Thomas returned to the ranch, the sun was low, and the eastern canyon walls had gone purple at their base. Peso was tired. So was he. Atza was not at the house. That frightened him more than he liked. Then he saw the wagon tracks leading in from Red Mesa Crossing, and found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hair pinned badly from a hurried ride. Hostine Yazzy's wooden cash box sat open on the table. Nalini stood near the stove spinning wool with slow, even motions, as if she had decided ordinary work could hold the room together. Atza had sorted the contents into stacks: dates, amounts, deputy names, descriptions. Her handwriting filled a clean summary sheet at the center. 49 payments, she said without looking up. 4 years and 2 months. The first 3 were smaller. Then he grew confident. Thomas removed his hat slowly. Your father gave you this. He gave it to me after telling me twice that it was no use and once that it proved he was a coward. Nalini's spindle turned. I told him foolishness does not become wisdom because a proud man repeats it. Atza's mouth almost moved toward a smile. It did not get there. How is he? Thomas asked. She set her pencil down. Angry, ashamed, relieved. He cried when he thought I had stopped seeing. Thomas understood that. There were kinds of pain a man carried in front of his children, believing he had hidden them, when all he had really done was teach the children to be quiet around the wound. He will testify, Atsa said, if needed. Nalini looked up then. Needed or not, he wants to speak. There is a difference. Thomas nodded. Atsa turned the summary sheet toward him. This is enough to begin. It may be enough to hang him in court. Not if Crow controls the court. That is why Judge Pike matters. Atsa's eyes stayed on the paper a moment too long. Thomas noticed. What did you do? She looked at him then, and something in her face told him he was not going to like the answer, simply because it had been necessary. I wrote to him. When 2 days ago, Thomas was quiet. Nalini's spindle kept turning. You sent a letter to Judge Pike without telling me, he said. Yes. Why? Because you were going to wait until everything was perfectly arranged. Crow is not waiting. I had already written once. You wrote like a careful man asking another careful man to consider a careful problem. Atsa tapped the notice inside Thomas's coat with 2 fingers. This is not careful anymore. Thomas looked at her. She did not look away. I told him Crow was moving toward false charges. I told him the witnesses were ready enough. I told him if he meant to help, he needed to come now. And Nalini's nephew took the letter by the North Road. If Judge Pike was where you said, he may have it by tomorrow. Thomas stood with that. His first feeling was irritation, sharp and brief. Beneath it came something more complicated. Fear, maybe, or the old discomfort of a man who had built alone for so long that help felt almost like trespass. Atsa saw it. You built the foundation, she said, but a foundation is not a house. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. 3 horses, not passing, stopping. Nalini's spindle went still. Thomas moved to the window. Sheriff Elias Crow sat at the gate flanked by Deputy Cole and another man Thomas knew only as Briggs, broad-shouldered and dull-eyed. Crow wore his good coat. His badge caught the last of the sun. Atsa closed the cash box. Thomas went outside. Crow dismounted with the ease of a man entering property he believed the badge had already unlocked. Gray Horse, he said. I need you to come with us. What charge? Livestock theft. Animals bearing your mark have been found on 3 properties. Men are saying those animals passed through your hands. That is a lie. Crow smiled faintly. Then we should clear it up. Am I under arrest? You are under investigation. I am asking politely. And if I decline, Crow's smile disappeared. Then I stop asking. From the doorway, Atsa said, he will come. Crow looked past Thomas to her. Something moved through his eyes before he controlled it. Possession. Anger. Surprise that she stood there as if his badge had not entered the yard at all. 5 minutes, she said. Crow's jaw tightened. 5. Inside, Thomas turned on her. Judge Pike is not here. He may be close. Maybe. Yes. And if we wait until May becomes certainty, Crow will have already written the truth out of reach. She crossed to the bedroom door. Where is the notebook? Thomas stared at her. Under the loose floorboard. Southeast corner. And the copies wrapped in oilcloth beneath it. She nodded. I will take them to the trading post. Ruth and Ben are ready. My father's records are here. Samuel, Jonas, and Peter can be sent for. You planned this. I prepared for it. There was a difference. He knew it because she had taught him the difference between choosing and settling. Thomas took a slow breath. What do you need from me? Go with him. Read every paper. Make him write the charge clean. Do not give him anger. Give him record. He looked at her for a long moment. And you, I will make sure the record has witnesses. Outside, Crow called his name. Thomas put on his hat. At the door, Atsa touched his sleeve. Only that. A small thing gone almost before it happened. Stay steady, she said. You too. He walked out and mounted Peso between two deputies and a sheriff who thought the trap had closed. The jail in Red Mesa Crossing smelled of old straw sweat and sun-baked wood. Crow processed the charge with great care. Thomas read every line. Livestock theft, suspicious transfer, false report suspected, cooperation pending. He signed only where the law required. Crow came to the cell after the door shut. Your wife looked worried, he said. My wife looked occupied. Crow's pale eyes narrowed. Thomas sat on the bunk. There is a difference. By noon, Deputy Cole brought him a plate of beans and hard bread. He set it down without meeting Thomas's eyes. Martin Thomas said. The deputy paused. You know those animals were mine before they were evidence. Cole's face tightened. You know the fence did not burn itself. You know this case is false. I just work here. Thomas looked at him through the bars. So does every man who helps a bad thing stand upright. Cole left the food and went away. Thomas ate because hunger helped no one. Then he sat with his back against the wall and listened. Late in the afternoon, he heard voices outside. Not one or two. Many. A low gathering sound like weather pressing against the town. At the trading post, Atsa had laid the evidence across her father's back table. Ruth Tallman stood beside her with the land papers. Nalini watched the door. Hosteen held his payment records with both hands. Judge Nathaniel Pike arrived in a plain wagon just as the light began to turn gold, old and thin, and sharper-eyed than any man in the room expected. He read Thomas's notebook first, then the payment records, then Ruth's copies. When he finished, he closed the leather cover and looked at Atsa. Mrs. Greyhorse, he said your husband built a case. Atsa fastened the satchel. Yes, she said. Now we are going to give it a voice. The sound outside the jail began as a murmur and became a weight. Thomas Greyhorse sat on the narrow bunk, with his back against the wall, hands loose on his knees, listening to Red Mesa Crossing gather itself beyond the boards. At first, it was only a few voices low and uncertain, the way people spoke when they came upon trouble, but had not yet decided whether it belonged to them. Then came more. Boots on packed dirt. Wagon wheels slowing. A woman's sharp whisper. A man saying a name and not finishing the sentence. The jail had one high gap where two boards had shrunk apart with age. Through it, Thomas could see a broken slice of the street hat. Brim's shoulders the hem of a brown skirt, moving past sunlight, hard against dust. Something was happening. In the front room, Sheriff Crow's chair scraped back. What in hell is that, he said. No one answered quickly enough for his liking. Thomas heard Deputy Cole mutter something too low to carry. Then Crow's boots crossed the floor heavy and irritated, and the front door opened. The sound outside grew clearer. Thomas closed his eyes once. Atsa, he thought. Not as prayer, not as command. Just the name of the person now carrying the thing he had built alone, carrying it somewhere he could not see. 4 hours earlier, Atsa had stepped out of her father's trading post with the leather satchel in her left hand. She did not hurry once she reached the street. Hurrying made people think of panic. She wanted them to think of purpose. The afternoon light laid itself flat over Red Mesa Crossing. Dust hung in the air where wagons had passed. A pair of boys near the freight yard stopped tossing stones. Mrs. Keeler, who sold eggs twice a week from a covered basket, paused near the hitching rail. At the blacksmith's open door, the hammer went silent. Atsa walked to the water trough at the center of town and turned. Behind her came Hostin Yazi, holding himself very straight, his payment records wrapped in cloth beneath one arm. Nalini walked beside him carrying nothing, which somehow made her seem more prepared than anyone else. Ben Tallman came next, hat in hand. Ruth walked with the oilcloth packet tucked against her ribs. Samuel Begay, Jonas Redfeather, and Peter Two Rivers followed more slowly, each man carrying his own fear in a different posture. Judge Nathaniel Pike stood a little apart at first. He was thin, old, and plain in a brown coat that had seen better years. Nothing about him announced power. That was what made Atsa trust him more. People noticed. Small towns had a way of recognizing when a gathering was not accidental. A group standing together for no reason was gossip. A group standing together with silence between them was weather. Atsa set the satchel on the edge of the trough. "My husband was taken into custody this morning," she said. She did not shout. She did not need to. The quiet made people lean closer. Thomas Greyhorse is accused of livestock theft. The charge is false. The animals used to build that charge were first stolen from our south grazing ground by men acting under Sheriff Elias Crow's protection. A murmur moved through the street. Atsa lifted one hand, not dramatically, only enough to hold the space. This is not the first theft. It is not the first false paper. It is not the first family forced to pay for peace from the very man sworn to keep it. More people had stopped now. A teamster climbed down from his wagon. Two men came out of McCall's supply store. A woman in a gray shawl stood at the edge of the road, with a flour sack hugged to her chest. Fear had ruled Red Mesa Crossing, because every man thought he carried it by himself. Ben Tallman stepped forward first. He looked older than he had that morning. Or maybe Atsa thought he looked like a man finally standing upright under the exact weight he had been bent beneath for years. "My name is Benjamin Tallman," he said. 2 years ago, 20 acres of my north grazing land were taken from me by a changed county boundary. The original survey gave that land to me. The new record gave it to Silas Varn. Sheriff Crow told me if I contested it, my barn looked dry enough to burn. His voice shook once. Ruth moved beside him and unfolded the oilcloth packet. "These are copies of the original papers," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I kept them because men who change maps after dark should not be trusted with the only truth." Ben glanced at her, and something in his face loosened. Not pride. Something more painful and cleaner. Samuel Begay came forward next. Flour dust still clung to the seams of his coat despite his effort to brush it off. "I paid Sheriff Crow for 2 years," he said. "He called it a protection fee. When I stopped paying, the main stone in my mill was cracked. Took me 3 weeks to work again. I did not report it because I knew who would receive the report." A few heads turned toward the sheriff's office. Jonas Redfeather spoke about water. He held up the notice that had moved his hearing 2 days before it took place, delivered after the hearing had already ended. His bean field had gone dry because paper had been moved faster than water. Peter Two Rivers spoke so quietly, people had to lean in. "I paid because I have children," he said. "I paid because I was afraid. I kept marks of every dollar on feed receipts. I thought one day I might need to know how much of my pride I had sold." No one laughed. No one moved much. Then Hostin Yazi stepped forward. Atsa felt it in her chest before he spoke. Her father stood with the wrapped records in both hands. His face was severe, but the severity was no longer hiding fear. It was holding dignity in place. "My name is Hostin Yazi," he said. I own the trading post. For 4 years and 2 months I paid Elias Crow money he had no right to ask, and no shame to take. The street had gone very still. Hosteen unwrapped the records. I wrote every payment down. Date, amount, name of the deputy who collected, what was said. I kept these papers hidden because I thought they proved my weakness. His voice roughened at the edges. Nalini stood half a step behind him, close enough that he could feel her there without looking. I was wrong, Hosteen said. They prove his crime. Atsa looked at her father then, and saw not the man behind the counter, arranging grief into ledgers, but the man he had been before. Fear taught him to lower his voice. It hurt to see. It healed something, too. By then the crowd had grown large enough that people stood in the road. 30, maybe 40. More in doorways, more at windows. Men who had once spoken Crow's name carefully now listened to it spoken aloud, with accusation attached. The sheriff came through them like a man used to people moving before he reached them. At first they did. Then they slowed. Crow stopped 10 feet from Atsa. Deputy Cole stood behind him, face pale beneath his hat. Briggs lingered near the jail porch, one hand close to his belt. Crow's pale eyes moved over the witnesses, the papers, the crowd, then settled on Atsa. "That is enough," he said. His voice cut cleanly through the street. "This is an unlawful assembly. These are slanderous accusations against an officer of the law." Atsa did not lower her eyes. "They are documented accusations," she said. Crow smiled thinly. "You are a young wife frightened by your husband's arrest. Folks here will understand that. Grief makes people careless." Thomas, listening from the cell, heard the words faintly through the wall and felt his hands close once then open again. Outside, Judge Pike stepped forward. "Sheriff Crow," he said. Crow turned irritated first. Then something shifted in his expression. Recognition did not arrive all at once. It came slowly and unpleasantly. "I don't believe we've met," Crow said. "We have not. My name is Nathaniel Pike. I served 15 years as circuit judge through this district." The crowd changed around the words. Not loudly. More like every person had drawn breath at the same time. Crow's jaw hardened. "Retired, if memory serves." "Correct." "Then you hold no authority here." "Also correct," Pike said pleasantly. "Which is why I contacted the territorial marshal's office before I arrived." Crow did not move. Pike reached into his coat and removed a folded paper. He did not open it. He did not need to. "I have reviewed records of 4 years of extortion payments, falsified grazing boundaries, manipulated water proceedings, property destruction, livestock theft, and what appears to be a false arrest intended to obstruct complaint. In my professional judgment, the evidence is substantial." The silence around them became harder than sound. "I advise you to release Mr. Greyhorse immediately," Pike continued. "Keeping him now will not strengthen your position. It will add to the charges." Crow looked at the crowd. That was when Atsa saw the change. He was not looking for truth. He was looking for fear, for the old arrangement, for someone to step back, someone to lower their eyes, someone to remind the others what obedience had cost less than defiance. But the crowd had discovered itself. A woman near the freight office crossed her arms. The blacksmith stepped into the street. McCall, who had overcharged half the county, and probably knew more than he should, stared at his boots. People did not surge forward. They did not shout. They only remained. And remaining was enough. "This is not over," Crow said. "No," Pike said. "But it has changed." Crow turned sharply and walked back toward the jail. Atsa followed him. The crowd parted for her. Not dramatically, naturally. as if everyone understood that the road belonged to her for that moment. Inside the sheriff's office, Crow took the keys from the wall with a hard movement. "My husband Atsa said." "Just that." Crow looked at her as if there were a dozen things he wanted to say, and none that could survive being spoken while the town listened through the open door. He went to the back. Thomas stood when the cell door opened. For a moment, he and Crow faced each other in the dim back room. "You think this ends it?" Crow said. "No." Thomas answered. "I think it begins telling the truth." Crow stepped aside. Thomas walked into the front room and saw Atsa standing near the desk, the leather satchel at her side, dust on her skirt, face composed in the way a flame is composed when the wind has not yet reached it. "You move fast," he said. "You built the foundation. Do not say you just anything." Her expression shifted slightly. "You did not just anything," Thomas said. For a breath there was no jail, no Crow, no crowd. Only the two of them and the strange fact that a promise made for survival had somehow become a thing with roots. They walked outside together. The crowd released a sound when Thomas appeared. Not a cheer, an exhale. The sound of people realizing a door had opened and remained open. Hosteen came through the crowd and put both hands on Atsa's shoulders. He looked at her for a long moment, unable to find words large enough, then pulled her into his arms. Nalini watched them with dry eyes, and a face that said tears were not the only way to honor what mattered. Judge Pike shook Thomas's hand. "Your notebook was thorough work," he said. "My wife brought it into daylight. She did more than that." Pike glanced toward Atsa. She understood the hour. Thomas looked at her, still held by her father, and felt something in him shift. He had spent months building truth in secret, believing patience would keep it safe. Atsa had understood that truth kept too long in hiding could begin to resemble fear. As the crowd thinned in the late gold light, Pike lowered his voice. "Crow still wears the badge," he said. "Until the marshal arrives, he remains dangerous." Thomas looked toward the sheriff's office window. Crow stood inside still as a man counting what could yet be destroyed. Atsa came to Thomas's side. "How long?" she asked. 48 hours if the wire reached clean," Pike said. Thomas watched Crow's shadow behind the glass. "Then we keep everything copied," Atsa said. "And no one stays alone." Thomas looked at her. She did not look away. The town had spoken, but justice had not yet arrived. The next 2 days would decide whether the truth held its ground or burned like the north fence in the dark. For 2 days, Red Mesa Crossing moved like a town trying not to breathe too loudly. Sheriff Elias Crow still sat behind the desk at the end of the street. His badge still caught the light when he stepped outside. His deputies still came and went. The jail door still opened and closed under his hand. Nothing official had changed, and yet, everything had. People no longer lowered their voices when his name passed between them. They did not speak it loudly either. Courage, like fear, had habits, and Red Mesa Crossing was only beginning to learn new ones. But men who once stepped off the boardwalk when Crow approached now stayed where they were. Women who once hurried through their errands now looked directly at the sheriff's office window and did not pretend they had not. That was dangerous. Thomas Greyhorse knew it. A cornered man with a badge was still a cornered man. A wounded wolf did not become harmless because the pack had finally seen blood on its mouth. Atsa kept the evidence at the trading post not in 1 stack, but in 3. 1 set stayed in Hosteen's back room. 1 set went with Ruth Tallman to her house wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath a flour bin. 1 set Judge Pike carried in a satchel. He never set more than arm's length away. "Paper burns," Ruth had said. So do houses, Atsa answered. Then we do not keep all the truth in one house. That settled it. Nalini sat most of those 2 days near the trading post window, with wool in her lap and her eyes on the street. She spun thread with the same slow patience she had carried all her life, but Thomas noticed that she placed her chair where she could see Crow's office door. She said very little. She did not need to. Her silence had become one more watch set over the town. Hosteen moved through the trading post with a strange new stiffness, as if standing upright after years of bending had made his back ache. Customers came and went quietly. Some bought things they did not need just to have a reason to step inside. Some placed coins on the counter and then awkwardly told Hosteen they were sorry. He accepted the words with a nod, neither forgiving nor refusing them. Thomas spent those 2 days riding between the ranch and town, sleeping little, checking the north fence where charred posts still leaned black against the sky. Atsa stayed mostly at the trading post, organizing, copying, answering Judge Pike's questions with a precision that made the old man watch her over his spectacles in a way that was half assessment and half respect. On the second evening, Thomas found her alone at the back table. The lamplight lay yellow across the documents. Her hair had loosened from its pins. A pencil mark darkened the side of her finger. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I slept last night. You sat in a chair with your hat over your face for an hour. That counts some." She looked at him then, and for the first time in days, something like tired amusement touched her mouth. Not enough. He sat across from her. Between them lay the story of Crow's rule payments, false lines, dry fields, broken stone, stolen animals, signatures that had harmed people more cleanly than bullets. "Do you think the marshal will come?" she asked. "Yes." "You say that like certainty." "I say it because doubt does not make him arrive faster." She looked down at the papers. "My father asked this morning whether it was wrong that he wanted to see Crow taken in irons." Thomas thought about that. "No," he said. "Wanting justice to have a shape is not wrong. And if the shape is ugly, most true things are at first." Atsa rested one hand on the payment records. Some things were not made whole because they had never broken. They were made whole because people chose to rebuild them together. Thomas looked at her across the table. The words were quiet, but they held the whole town inside them. Before he could answer, a horse stopped outside. Both of them stood. Hosteen came from the front room with his hand already reaching beneath the counter, where he kept an old revolver he had never fired at a man. Nalini's spinning stopped. A knock sounded. Judge Pike opened the door before anyone else moved. A tall man stood outside in a dust-colored coat, 2 riders behind him, and a folded paper in his gloved hand. He had a weathered face, a gray mustache, and the calm look of someone who had learned the difference between haste and speed. "Marshal Aaron Vale," he said. "I am looking for Judge Nathaniel Pike." Pike exhaled through his nose. It might have been relief. On another man, it would have been a prayer. "You found him," he said. The marshal did not waste time. That was the first thing Thomas respected about him. He spent an hour in the back room reading what needed to be read and asking questions that cut straight to the bone of the matter. Atsa answered most of them. Hosteen explained the payments. His voice stayed steady until he reached the month he had missed, and the deputy who came after sundown to explain what happened to men who forgot obligations. Ruth Tallman arrived with Ben and laid down her copy of the boundary papers. "Original survey," she said. "Altered county version. Dates marked." Marshal Vale studied both. "Who made the alteration? County clerk signed it," Ben said. Crow delivered the decision. "Convenient. Most theft is," Ruth said, "when thieves hold office. Samuel Begay came after dark, then Jonas Redfeather and Peter Two Rivers. Each man gave his account. Each one looked smaller before speaking and larger after. Not happier, not safe, but less alone. By the time the marshal closed the final document, the room felt different. Not finished, aligned. "This is enough for arrest," Vale said. Hosteen shut his eyes once. Atsa did not move. Thomas looked toward the street, toward the office, where Crow had spent years making fear look like law. When he asked. "Now," Vale said. The arrest happened under a white morning sun. Crow was behind his desk when Marshal Vale entered with two deputies, Judge Pike and Thomas, just behind them. Crow looked up, and for a moment his face held its old expression of annoyance, as if the world had once again entered without permission. Then he saw the warrant. The old expression left, not all at once. Men like Crow did not give anything away all at once. But the pale calculation behind his eyes changed shape. He looked from Vale to Pike, from Pike to Thomas, then past them toward the window where people had begun to gather without being called. "You are making a mistake," Crow said. Vale unfolded the warrant. "Elias Crow, you are under arrest for extortion, falsification of territorial records, livestock theft, conspiracy, obstruction, and abuse of office." Crow stood slowly. His hand did not go to his gun. Thomas had wondered whether it would. Perhaps Crow had calculated the room and found no path through it. Perhaps he had spent 2 days learning that the town beyond the window no longer belonged to his fear. Perhaps, like most cowards who had borrowed the appearance of courage, he understood when performance would get him killed. He held out his hands. The irons closed with a small, plain sound. There should have been satisfaction in it. Thomas felt some, but not as much as he might have once imagined. Mostly he felt the end of a weight he had carried so long that its leaving made him unsteady. Deputy Briggs was taken later that afternoon. He talked before sunset. He gave up Silas Varn, named the men who moved the animals, and confirmed what Thomas had known since the morning he found the gate lifted. The missing sheep and cattle were on Varn's land, hidden in a back draw, and marked for sale under altered bills. Deputy Martin Cole was questioned, but not arrested. He came to Thomas at the edge of town, with his badge removed and his hat in both hands. "I knew too much," Cole said. "Yes, I did too little. Yes." The young man swallowed. "I don't know what to do with that." "Carry it honestly," Thomas said. "That is where you start." Cole nodded once, looking older than he had the week before, and walked away. The livestock came home 3 days later. 31 sheep, 5 cattle, thin and nervous but alive. 1 ewe limped. 1 cow carried a calf low in her belly, which Atsa noticed before Thomas did. "Stubborn thing," she said. "The cow, all of us, maybe." Ben Tallman came the following Monday to help rebuild the burned fence. He brought tools wire and no speech prepared. Ruth arrived at noon with food and informed Thomas that the supply invoice from McCall's had an error of $6, in whose favor Thomas asked. She gave him a look. "Right," he said. Atsa laughed softly from beside the wagon, and the sound surprised him more than it should have. Not because it was loud. It was not. But because it belonged there. By Thursday, the north fence stood straight again, stronger than before. New posts set deeper, wire pulled tighter. Ash still marked the ground beneath it, but the line held. 6 weeks later, Red Mesa Crossing held a celebration near the trading post under the cottonwoods. No one called it a wedding reception until it already was one. Food appeared first, then lanterns, then fiddle music from a freighter who played badly but with conviction. There was mutton stew, beans, fry bread, coffee, black enough to float iron, and blankets spread for children who fell asleep, before the adults had finished talking. Hosteen danced with Atsa once awkwardly and with great seriousness. Nalini watched them with dry eyes and a face softened by more than lamplight. Ruth sat beside Atsa afterward and said, "Men think weddings happen when papers are signed. Women know they happen when a house begins holding two people's silence." Atsa looked across the gathering to where Thomas stood near the edge, uncomfortable with being the object of anyone's goodwill. "He is learning," she said. "So are you," Ruth answered. Later, Atsa found him where the lantern light thinned. "You are counting exits," she said. "No." She waited. "Not anymore," he said. The fiddle dragged one last tune into the night. People talked in low voices. Children slept in wagon beds. Somewhere near the post, Hosteen laughed at something Ben said, and the sound seemed to loosen a knot in the dark. The fence held, Atsa said. It burned first. "Many things do." Thomas looked at her then. The woman who had ridden through red dust and asked for his name. The woman who had taken his hidden notebook and given it a voice. The woman who had turned a promise made for survival into something that felt slowly, and without asking permission, like home. "I thought a full life was something that happened around me," he said. "Not to me." Atsa's face changed, not soft exactly, but unguarded. "I had another man in mind if you refused," she said. "Who?" "Ben Tallman." Thomas looked across the clearing at Ben, who was explaining something with both hands, while Ruth watched him with patient exhaustion. "He talks too much," Thomas said. Ruth would have refused for him. Thomas laughed, then open and unprepared. Atsa looked at him as if she would remember the sound. They returned to the ranch late. The windmill turned in the dark. The animals settled in the pens. The north fence stood black and straight beneath the stars. Inside the kitchen held 2 cups folded cloth from the celebration, a half loaf of fry bread wrapped beside the stove, and papers Atsa had left stacked neatly on the table. It was not the clean loneliness Thomas had once mistaken for peace. It was lived in, disturbed, shared. He stood in the doorway a moment, listening. From her room, Atsa moved softly, setting something down, opening a drawer. Ordinary sounds. Good sounds. Outside, the wind came down from the canyon walls and moved across the pasture, touching ash, new posts, sheep cattle, roof and road, without choosing among them. Thomas lay down in the dark. For the first time in longer than he could measure, the silence did not ask anything from him. It simply held. And Thomas Greyhorse slept.